Welcome back to another episode of Health is Wealth. And thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. And as always, I am beyond grateful and thankful from the bottom of my heart to each and every one of you who is tuning into today's episode and tuning into the podcast. As every Sunday, I am dropping a new episode of the podcast, just sharing some words and thoughts, things that I am learning on my ride called life. Things that I am learning for the first time, things I'm just understanding in a different point of view in hopes that it brings you some inspiration, motivation, and value. Maybe you're going to hear some things for the first time. Maybe you're going to hear things the second round over with a different point of view. And if anything else, just to get to understand me a little bit and the quest and mission that I am on in life. So thank you again for tuning in. What I wanted to discuss here in this episode is one of the things that I believe is one of the number one killers of our dreams. And it's this thing called distractions. I truly believe it's probably been one of the biggest things that's hindered me, to be honest, if I want to be real with you here, and be vulnerable and just share some of the things that are holding me back. It's just that, distractions. Oftentimes we say we want a lot of things in life. We desire to acquire more. We desire to live a bigger life. We want certain things. But unless our actions line up to that, then we're never going to really get anywhere, right? And a lot of it doesn't come from, if we want those things and we're not achieving them, that we're not qualified, we don't have the skills, or we don't have the abilities to do so. But I think one of the things that really gets in our way is distractions. Sometimes it doesn't seem so obvious, but over time, it adds up. The little things that get us off track, right? And I think it's the one thing that people who have reached their level of success, who have reached the lifestyle that they wanted to live, who have reached this point, of outcome that they desired, is simply because they eliminated most of the distractions that begin to become roadblocks for most of us who do want that lifestyle. And those are the things that get in the way. A lot of these times, these distractions look like, oftentimes we desire these things. We want the outcome of the lifestyle. But instead of working towards, strategies, game planning, right? Writing out our goals, working on actual activities that are going to get us there. Perhaps looking on YouTube to research, listening to podcasts, listening to books, networking, just finding information, implementing stuff. Oftentimes they're distracted with maybe you come home, maybe you're trying to escape a 9-to-5 job, and in so many years from now, you want to live a better life. You feel that you've seen that there's better out there for you to live, yet instead of trying to spend time, actually working towards that goal, even though there's good intentions in your heart and mind that you want to, you come home after a long day of work, and I get it. Maybe you take a few minutes to rest and you fall asleep for the night. Perhaps, you come home from a stressful day and just want to zone out for a minute. So you start, channel surfing, if we may, right? And you start going down, watching TV shows, and then all of a sudden a couple of hours go by and there's all this time you wasted with really nothing, maybe an activity that maybe made you feel less stressed, but didn't really get you to the bigger goals that you have. Sometimes it's those, weekend, hangouts, right? Again, we spend a long day working, and then we spend, many days working, at a job, and then comes to the weekend and we just feel it's time for us to take a load off. We deserve to just unwind and things like that. And those can be other distractions too, because, even though rightfully, right, we deserve to have a break, and, we bust our butts at work all day and have these stressful lives or whatever. Just, hanging out and not doing much, if that's a constant thing, every weekend you're spending a few hours just hanging out, over time, these things that are distractions add up. Sometimes the distractions come in form of, you're pursuing one thing, and then, you spend some time in that thing and it's not really getting you this outcome as quickly as you desire. So then you start shifting into something else. It's that shiny toy syndrome. Something else catches your eyes. Maybe this feels like it's going to be the route. So then you start getting distracted from this other thing with another thing. And then ultimately you start going down that rabbit hole. And then time goes by and you never really make traction in one thing because, we keep skipping and hopping and jumping around. And believe me, I'm guilty of all of these things, right? So there are so many of these distractions that get in our way in life. Sometimes they come in the form of excuses, of hesitation, of putting off. We're going to start that thing today. We're going to start it tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe when Monday comes. Maybe we'll start in the new year. There's so many different forms and ways that these distractions, continue to hinder and put roadblocks. But it's one of the biggest things that delays us from what we really want. It's one of the things that really stops us dead in our track. And I believe if we can figure out these distractions and understand them and understand the things in our lives, that aren't getting us closer to our goals, that are either pulling us back or stopping us in our tracks, the better I think we're equipped to be like, okay, I observe that this is just a distraction. If I could figure it out, if I could be aware of it, if I can write it down, look at it and realize that, then maybe I can get myself back on track. I think for a lot of things in our life, it's about tracking, it's about measuring, it's about writing it down, it's about observing, it's about being intentional. Without being intentional, without writing things down, without tracking stuff, then there's no way to really fix the problems. When I look at somebody who's living a life of where they want to live, and I begin to study like how did they get there, and listen to their podcast, listen to video clips of them speaking of their journey. I am telling you, one of the biggest things that I hear across the board is they eliminated distractions, right? They realized the things that were going to get them to their goals, and they saw the things that weren't going to get them to the goals, and they eliminated all distractions. Again, going out on Friday night, going to drink, going to party, going to smoke, going to do all these other things is a distraction. If your goal is to live a bigger life, if your goal is from years from now to be financially free, to live a life of abundance, to have certain experience, sometimes we don't see it because it's one day at a time. It's a few hours at a time. But if you could look ahead and start to add those hours up, add those days up, add those activities up, then, in the long run, it becomes a very big deal, because that is the difference from someone who locked in and got to where they wanted versus someone who's stuck and still not there years ahead in time because of those distractions. I am so guilty of all this myself, I promise. And it's one of those things I recognize, and I have to, really pull myself back as well, right? From being distracted from things that are just getting in the way. Maybe things that I want to do, things that, that bring me some joy in the meantime right now, things that, help me unwind, things that are fun, right? But I have to realize there are certain things that no matter what they are, no matter what they bring me in the meantime, in the short time, in the now, they're still distractions. If I know my big goal is 5 years from now to be financially free, to be my own boss, to live a life that I want to live. And that is the separator from those who succeed to those who are still trying to wish and want and figure a way out, is distractions. I don't think we realize how, much it could really, get in the way of that process, in that journey. Because, for someone who doesn't have distractions in their life, it's almost like they're making a beeline from here to there in our, in their journey, right? They have a starting point and they have essentially a finishing point. And, those who eliminate distractions and only focus on the goal and the things that are going to get them to their goal, get there quicker, because there's not obstacles or really hurdles in their way to knock them off course, to derail them, to take them down a different path. Every time we have a distraction in our life. It adds a new obstacle, in our way, a new hazard, a new hurdle, a new wall, a new thing like that. And so these are the biggest things that are going to ultimately kill our dream. If we can eliminate distractions, then we eliminate, what's going to get in the way of us being able to achieve our dreams. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode. And as always, I will see you on the next one.